Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for um, watching this video today on Understanding Sexual Violence 101. Uh, Today, I just wanted to give a little content warning before we continue on with the video, um, that this conversation tonight might be difficult to hear and talk about. So if at any time during the presentation you're feeling overwhelmed or have any intense emotions come up, please feel free to take a break from the video, pause it, or exit out. And please know that our 24/7 hotline number is listed at the bottom right-hand corner of every other slide besides this title slide. So feel free to call that hotline number at any time, and a trained professional will be there on the other end to help you out through those intense emotions. And just so everyone knows here, my name is Caroline, pronouns she, her, and I am one of Hartley House's community engagement and prevention coordinators. So I help conduct presentations and educational trainings like this one, as well as help with awareness events to tell everyone in the community who we serve and how we support. And I'll allow my co-facilitator, Allie, to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. My name is Allie, and I am the other community engagement coordinator here at Hartley House.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allie. So let's go ahead and jump into today's presentation. So first, we're going to go through just the agenda. So what we're going to be talking about today. So first, we're going to introduce everyone to Hartley House, our mission, who we support, and how we support. Then we'll go into defining some key terms that are relevant to the topic of sexual violence. We'll talk about the statistics and the wide scope of sexual violence. We will go over the main tenets of consent. We'll go over rape culture. And then lastly, we'll end with some safety planning ideas for survivors, how you can support a survivor who is in your life. And then we'll give you some tools, some bystander intervention strategy tools that you can use to help prevent sexual violence within your community. And so if this is your first Hartley House presentation, welcome, and thank you so much for tuning in and watching. If you're not sure who we are a local nonprofit, and by local, I mean in the Frederick, Maryland area, with a mission to end intimate partner violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and child abuse, and to provide survivors with safety, shelter, and supportive services. And so, like I said, Hartley House is a nonprofit organization, and it was created in 1979 after a local group of women recognized the need for emergency housing for other women who were victims of domestic violence. However, since then, Hartley House has expanded to become Frederick's only service center for all victims and survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and child abuse. And we provide services to any survivor, no matter their identity or their socioeconomic status. All of our survivor support services are free and they are trauma informed. And so while we still have that emergency shelter, we also have that 24-hour hotline, which I discussed, and you can find at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. We also offer hospital accompaniment for safe or sexual assault forensic examinations, as well as individual and group counseling sessions, legal support services, an abuser intervention program, and this is our paid service. So we do have abusers pay for this program to end the cycle of violence. And then we also have our prevention and community engagement team, which is the team that Allie and I are a part of. And so without further ado, let's get into tonight's, or today, whenever you're watching it, today's content. And I just wanted to give another content warning. So we're going to be going over a few terms related to sexual violence that are going to be helpful in aiding our understanding of these topics. However, that doesn't mean that these topics aren't difficult to address. And so we just want to give a good content warning that we will be using specific language as it pertains to sexual violence, and we will be giving examples. So please, if at any point you're thinking this is not within my capacity today, please feel free to turn off the video and to call that 24-hour hotline number. And so the first term we're going to be going over today is sexual violence. And this is an encompassing term, or what we like to call an umbrella term. And so it can be defined as a non-legal term that refers to crimes such as sexual assault, rape, and sexual abuse. And there are other examples here on the screen. And while I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, I do think it's important that we understand that sexual violence can include in-person unwanted sexual contact, but it can also include digital unwanted explicit image sharing or pressure to sharing explicit images when you would not do so under another circumstance. And so with COVID kicking off our virtual world, we are really seeing virtual forms of violence occurring more often. So it's just important that we, speak to that and we name it that it is sexual violence. And so our next term is sexual assault. And this term refers to sexual contact or behavior where explicit consent has not been given by the survivor. And so when we're thinking about the term sexual assault, it can take a variety of different forms. However, I am going to be going through some examples just so that we can understand and name that these examples are sexual assault. It isn't to make anybody, feel triggered. It's more so that we can identify that, oh, this is sexual assault. But again, I want to give that content warning that if that's not within your capacity today to hear these examples, please go ahead and fast forward or log off. One common thread throughout the examples that I'm going to give right now is that the survivor is never, ever at fault. So just keep that in mind. But one form of sexual assault is attempted rape. And even if the perpetrator is unsuccessful, taking deliberate action to rape another individual is still sexual assault, and this is still a crime. Fondling or unwanted touching is another form of sexual assault. Another person should never put their hands on another without explicit permission to do so. Forcing a survivor to perform any kind of sexual activity also constitutes sexual assault. And so this can include forced oral sex or penetration of the perpetrator's body. And then the last example we have is rape. And this is defined as forced penetration of the survivor's body and is another horrific form of sexual assault. And so the next term that we're going to be defining today is sexual harassment. And according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexual advantages, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature that occurs in the workplace or learning environment. And so two things to keep in mind when it comes to sexual harassment is that it does not have to be about sexual behavior specifically, and it does not have to be directed just at one individual. And so on the next slide, we're going to go through some more examples of what this can look like. So this can look like sexual joking or just presentation of degrading images on a person's desk or phone or on their laptop at a workplace or learning environment. This can look like sexual behaviors that contribute to a hostile environment in the workplace or school. It can look like repeated disregard for sexual boundaries or persistent pressure to engage in sexual activity. And so when looking at these examples, there may seem to be a large gap between sexual joking and persistent pressure to engage in sexual activity, right? However, when individuals allow for sexual joking or things like rape jokes to occur, these individuals make way for other escalated forms of violence to be normalized. And so it's important that individuals stop seemingly more benign forms of sexual harassment and sexual violence in general, because in that way, individuals can help to prevent more egregious forms of sexual harassment and sexual violence. And we're going to talk more about that when we get to the rape culture section of the presentation. But the last and final term that we're going to be discussing today is digital sexual violence. And this is the practice of sharing intimate or sexualized images or recordings of another person online without their consent, or pressuring someone into sending these images when they wouldn't otherwise do so. And again, COVID has really spiked instances of digital sexual violence, so it's important that we're naming that as sexual violence. And so you may be thinking, well, how wide scope is this issue? And unfortunately, the statistics show us that every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. So that is one individual, one sexual assault almost every minute, just about, right? So this is a wide scope issue. And again, this is just nationally, this isn't worldwide. And then lastly, it's important to know that sexual assault and violence can happen to anyone, no matter an individual's identity. And so a lot of times we don't think that males can be survivors of sexual violence or assault, but they in fact can, and we see that happening, and we'll have more statistics on that on the next slide. And so when we're looking at the statistics of sexual violence, it's important to keep in mind that this type of violence or crime is severely underreported. And so these statistics are based only on the information we have of reported instances of sexual violence. However, in reality, these numbers could be much higher. And so 1 in 6 women, 1 in 33 men, and 1 in 2 trans individuals have been the survivor of an attempted or completed rape in their lifetimes. And we're not telling you these statistics to scare anyone, but it's more so that we're all informed that, this form of violence occurs more often than we think, and definitely more often than we'd hope, right? We hope it would be none. And so furthermore, 90% of adult rape victims are women, and younger women between the ages of 16 and 19 are particularly vulnerable, as they are 4 times more likely than the general population to be survivors of completed or attempted rape or sexual assault. Like I said before, that doesn't mean that men cannot be survivors of sexual violence. And oftentimes, the 1 in 33 statistic we're imagining is really underreported due to gender stereotypes and the ideas that we hold for masculine individuals within our society. And then lastly, the TGQN, or the transgender, gender queer, or non-conforming community, especially the youth within this community are shown to be more vulnerable than their non-TGQN peers. And so 21% of TGQN college students have experienced sexual assault, compared to 18% of non-TGQN women and 4% of non-TGQN men. And again, like I said before, when we were going over the examples of sexual assault, I do want to bring back that sexual assault is never the survivor's fault ever. So when we're looking at these statistics, it's important to remember that an individual's identity and their behavior has nothing to do with the sexual assault, but more so with how our culture uplifts certain voices and gives power to certain individuals. And so now I'm going to hand the presentation over to my co-facilitator, Allie. She's going to discuss more about consent and rape culture and supporting survivors. That was it. Yep.
Thank you so much, Caroline. So as we begin the discussion about consent, it's really important to realize that consent is probably one of the most powerful tools that we have to end sexual violence. Again, this is just one thing that's within a large scope of tools that can help, but this is incredibly important. So consent can be defined as affirmative, conscious, voluntary agreement to engage in sexual activity every step of the way. Consent is essential in showing respect and making sure that everyone is just on the same page. And, I think it's also just important to note that consent can be a tool, not just in sexual situations. It can be used in, conversation. It can be used just, to understand people's boundaries. And even just, how you confront a person, asking them before you berate them with a question, or, checking in with them before you, go on a tangent about how your day was, seeing where they're at before you, kind of move forward with that can be a really good thing. So, when we're talking about consent, this can seem like a really big idea, but it's really an easy way to remember it is the acronym of FRIES. So consent should always be freely given, meaning it's not coerced, reversible, it can be taken back at any time, informed, people should be aware of what they are consenting to, enthusiastic, people should feel happy to give their consent and feel good about what they're consenting to, and specific, giving consent to a precise action and that is understood by all parties involved. So as we move through this next section, take a moment to pause the video and think of how you would react to these situations. First, we're going to talk about F. So that is freely given, meaning that the consent is not coerced. So take a moment to think just to yourself, can you think of a situation where consent may not be freely given? I think most of us probably assume a situation that involves sexual activity. However, it could also just be someone made a dinner reservation without asking you first and you already had plans, but now you feel bad and you need to go. So you decide to, cancel the plans that you already had so that you save face with the person who made the reservation. It can be as simple as that. Next is R, reversible, meaning that consent can be taken back at any time. Can you think of a time where you made plans, then later decided to cancel them?
And I think in a situation here that could answer this question is that maybe you've made plans with friends or a loved one on a Friday night. But then Friday night comes and you've had such a long, tired week at work or at school. And maybe you're an introvert and you're like, you know what, I really just need to be by myself and re-energize. That's completely okay, right? It's completely okay to, feel like you want to have some alone time. And in that case, you can reverse the consent. You can tell that individual, hey, I know we had plans and I was looking forward to it, but I had a really hard week and I'm just going to need some time by myself. And the same is definitely applied when it comes to sexual activity. Consent can be reversed at any point during a sexual interaction, and that needs to be respected by all and any parties.
Thank you, Caroline. So the next we have is I, informed, meaning that everyone is aware of what they're consenting to throughout the entire experience and discussion. So with this one, think about, have you ever gone to an interview expecting to be interviewed by one person, but instead when you show up, it's 5 people and they're all interviewing you? Has that ever happened or something similar? So I think in any case where that surprise kind of happens, you had a clear understanding of what you thought was going to happen. That interviews, set of people had a clear understanding of what was happening on their end, and it led to a miscommunication. This can happen in so many different ways in our lives and, especially in sexual activity. So when both parties have different, points of view or different information, then can consent be given? No, because they were misled as to what they were consenting to. So, it's also important to remember in all of these examples, the person who is being asked to provide consent can make their decision, in that moment, and it shouldn't matter. Of course, there are going to be times where, it might be a little annoying when they change their mind all of a sudden, but you can't force someone into doing something if they say no. And I think that's a really important, overwhelming thing to just remember with all of this is people have the right to make the decisions for themselves in the time that they make them. And we cannot force anyone to do something that makes them uncomfortable or, just not align with what they feel like doing. Simple as that. Next, we have E. Have you ever gone somewhere with your friends to be nice, but you didn't actually want to go? How did you act?
So I know I've definitely done this before. I've been the person in this situation where, I'm kind of dragging my feet along, but I'll say I'll go just to keep the peace, right? But in that situation, I didn't act like I wanted to be there. I stood like I'm thinking of a specific example where it was a party in college. I stood in the corner. I didn't really talk to people. I didn't want to engage. And so my body language itself was showing that I wasn't enthusiastic. And I think that's a really important takeaway, especially when we're talking about sexual activity. So I might be talking to all of the people pleasers in the audience, but a lot of times individuals are felt like they have to say yes to things, even though they really don't want to. And therefore, is that really consent? It's not. It's not because it really isn't freely given. They don't want to do it, but they feel like they have to. And in those instances, we need to be checking both verbal and nonverbal cues of enthusiastic consent. So if we're not getting an enthusiastic, yes, I want to go, we need to check in. And if the body language of the individual or individuals is standoffish, they seem frozen, they seem like, they don't want to be here, they're not reciprocating, that's also time that we need to check in because it might be somebody's body language saying, this is not enthusiastic consent.
Such a good point and a good reminder, Caroline. Thank you. And I really want to hone in on the fact that, if both parties, especially within sexual activity, are not enthusiastically consenting to what they are deciding to do, it's not going to be fun for anyone. So, with that in mind, if it's not an enthusiastic yes, take it as a no and then check in. Lastly, we have S, specific. Have you ever made plans with a friend and something about the plans you made got lost in translation? So maybe y'all made plans to go to dinner and you thought it was on Thursday, they thought it was on Tuesday, and then both of you mixed it up and you can't go at all. If people had been more specific in the messages, maybe the one friend just declined to tell you what day that they thought, that can be pretty frustrating, right? So when you don't have all the information, it's hard to make plans. And when those plans aren't, once you don't have all the information and they're not specifically laid out to you, it's really hard to make a decision whether or not to move forward, right? So, and then if someone has all of the information given to them and they aren't comfortable with it, absolutely able to say no. So again, with all of these in mind, remember to look for body language, the nonverbal cues that something might be off, or, they're not enthusiastic. People can change their mind. They are able to do that. If it is a coerced situation, it's not consent. And if they don't have all the information as to what they're consenting to, again, it's not consent. So the next thing we have is this very well-known video. I'm not sure if everyone has seen it, but it is probably the most clear-cut way to explain consent that I've seen in a long time. Fair warning, it does have some adult language. So if you are around young ears, or someone that you don't want to hear certain language, or if you yourself do not want to hear certain language, just fast forward. But there is adult language in this video.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, fuck yes, I would fucking love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please. That's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, "But you wanted tea last week." Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
All right. So that is just a great video that really captures what consent is, how ludicrous it is to, and try and force someone into doing something. And, consent really is everything when we're talking about sexual violence, because it is such a huge tool that can help prevent, ongoing or future violence. And consent is a great way to combat rape culture. So you're probably thinking, what is rape culture? It might be something that you've heard before, but what does it really mean? So rape culture can be defined as a culture in which rape and other forms of sexual violence are common, and prevalent attitudes, practices, and media condone, normalize, excuse, or encourage sexualized violence. There are so many far-reaching consequences of rape culture. And, I think we are living in a society where sexual violence has been normalized, in movies, video games, conversation, social culture. Everything has, touches of it that have become acceptable. A really handy way to kind of look at what rape culture is and how it can escalate to violence is this handy visual aid. So this is kind of the pyramid of rape culture. On the bottom, you'll see the lesser forms that, we probably will just write off as, mean things to say or do, but not as serious as, things in the top section. But when we build them upon each other, you can really see how things do lead to one another. Something starting as, boys will be boys. Well, you might just have enabled someone to feel more comfortable in, doing something about it. And then if they feel comfortable doing something about it, maybe they'll do it more. And then it will just slowly build up. Again, it doesn't always have to happen that way, but it can. And it's important to realize that. So at the bottom level, we have victimization. Unfortunately, such things as rape jokes, sexist attitudes, and victim blaming are oftentimes really just accepted in our culture. But these things can continue to escalate and reach the different levels of this pyramid. It can start to lead into catcalls and threats. And then threats can lead to acts of violence. Acts of violence can lead to felonies. So, from that victimization, we have degradation. And this can include non-consensual photography that can turn into revenge porn. Unwanted touch can turn into groping. So, the best way to prevent escalation is by calling it out, stopping it where it's happening. Combating rape culture and not accepting what has been deemed as normal can really help us keep things from rising to those upper levels of abuse and assault. The upper levels of, removal of authority and explicit violence take the previous levels to the next level. This includes statutory rape, sexual coercion, even murder. And what's important to remember as we look at this is that we all have an important role to play in preventing the different layers of rape culture from building upon one another. It starts with saying something. Of course, if it's not safe to do so, don't put yourself in a situation where you would be harmed for saying something. But if you can safely say something or just call someone out, that could lead to maybe them thinking twice about the next joke that they want to make, or maybe it'll lead to them realizing that it's harmful what they're saying or what they're doing. And, that's how we break that cycle. Another way to kind of challenge our view of what we might have accepted in the past is looking at, popular, beloved films and TV shows. There's so many tropes out there that at first seem really romantic and like funny and cute and, kind of rom-com-y, but in reality are actually rooted in violence and pretty scary things. So I think when we go back and watch some of these movies that we have such a, good memories of, so many good memories of, you kind of have to take off those rose-colored glasses and have a better look at them. Because I know I watched movies back and been like, oh, I used to think that was so romantic. Now it's just creepy. So this is a great video compilation of just some of those examples. Let's take a look.
all heard the phrase no means no, right? Like if someone isn't into you and they tell you, you should back off. Here's how Gaston reacted to that in Beauty and the Beast.
Who does she think she is? That girl has tangled with the wrong man. No one says no to Gaston.
But he's the villain, you might be thinking. So that works, right? Well, maybe if you're an adult who has the experience and knowledge to understand this is an exaggeration of an alpha male. But if you're a kid, what kind of message is that? Or how about date rape? Doesn't sound like something you'd see in a Gilbert like rom-com.
I got Carol in the bedroom right now, passed out cold. I could violate her 10 different ways if I wanted to.
Dude, what? And we all agree, it would be up if you trick someone into sleeping with you, right? Well, that's exactly what happens in Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh, Stan, you did things to me you've never done before. You're that nerd.
And then there's Peeping Toms, which are pretty much any woman's nightmare, except in Porky's, where it's apparently hilarious.
Don't be alarmed, girls. This is just your health department. We're here to check out all unlicensed p***s.
Listen, we get it. These are outlandish comedies that are trying to entertain people. Like, no one's saying we're learning sex ed from freaking Porky. But that doesn't mean these movies are immune to criticism. What does it say when boys are raised to believe this behavior is funny and charming? What does it say when girls are raised to believe this is not only acceptable, but an expectation?
Tell me more, tell me more. Did she put up a fight?
Wow, what a fun little ditty. And this kind of stuff isn't always obvious. This pressure on women to accept they gotta do what guys want is a classic staple of rom-com. The Notebook, I'm looking at you.
Oh, you go out with me?
What? No!
All right, well, you leave me no other choice then.
Oh my God.
Come on, man, that's not cool. And when's the last time you actually watched American Pie?
Did I miss anything?
No, you are just in time. Oh, this is incredible.
A guy did this exact same thing to a female sports reporter, and he ended up in jail. Then there's Superbad, which is a movie based on the plot of teenage boys trying to score booze so they can lose their virginities to drunk girls.
Booze and girls equals, I don't know, do you?
Yes, that's a definite yes.
Maybe that's funny if women weren't regularly taken advantage of while they're drunk. Maybe. Like, this stuff is even in cartoons.
You may call me streetcar because of my desire for...
What the hell is that about? Seriously though, this stuff is kind of messed up considering 1 out of every 6 women has been sexually assaulted in her lifetime. And yes, it goes both ways. Remember 40 Days and 40 Nights? Josh Hartnett's character abstains from sex, but one woman decides that she doesn't respect that decision, so she rapes him.
Relax, baby. It's over.
Is that really funny? In real life, 1 out of every 10 rape victims are male. Again, no one's saying we gotta take the original prints of these movies and burn them. But it's really something to think about. Just look at how far we've come.
I could kiss you. I could. I mean, I'd like to. May I? Me? I mean, may we? Wait, what?
We may.
So I think that video just really presents all of this in a really good way because, you know, I think we just kind of accept things when they're shown in the context of it being funny or a romantic movie. You know, we're already in the mindset of, oh, this is a movie about love. So like, you know, that's understandable. I challenge everyone in this, whoever is watching, to take a closer look at some of those fan favorite movies and take a closer look at, you know, that rom-com you used to love. Is it really romantic or were you just told it was? So now that we kind of have all of this in our tool belt and we are reframing our thoughts, how do we support the people that have already experienced this, you know, this violence and this horrific acts? A great tool for survivors of sexual violence is something called emotional safety planning. Emotional safety plans are really useful to support someone after they've experienced a traumatic event, or maybe are just feeling overwhelmed and anxious. These are a couple examples of things that could help someone after they've gone through a traumatic experience, you know, just to get them through those periods of intense emotions. Remember, unless you are a licensed therapist or a doctor, you should not be giving out medical advice. But these are just a few tools to help them work through intense emotions while they're happening, and then can hopefully get them to a better place where they can seek professional help if they need to. So first is practicing grounding techniques. A really good example of a grounding technique is the 5-4-3-2-1 method. So this engages all of our senses. So 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can taste, and 1 thing that you can, oh goodness, I'm so sorry.
Smell.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, y'all. And these should just be very simple. Next is just grabbing a glass of water. Honestly, just thinking and focusing on a simple task, and then also, feeling the weight of the glass with the water in it, feeling how it goes down your throat, focusing on something important but menial can be a really great way to distract the mind and, divert those thoughts. Having the go-to self-care plan. If they don't have them, talk them through what makes them feel safe. What is something that, is comfortable to them? Do they have a blanket that they like that makes them feel really warm? Is there a shirt, that they like to put on? Is there something that smells good that kind of brings them into a different place? Do they have a place that feels safe to them? Is it a specific room in their house? Is it, in their car driving with the windows down, listening to music? Is it, talking to their mom? What makes them feel safe? Helping them identify and mobilize their support network is really important as well. These can be people who are in your family, out of your family, at your school, at your job. Whoever feels like a safe and trustworthy person to you is really important to have. And, if you feel like this isn't something that you can trust with the people in your life, call a place like Hartley House or call the national network, and they can connect you to your local agency. At Hartley House, we have trained professionals on the other end of the line at all hours of the day who are able to talk to you through some of these coping skills and grounding techniques. Next, if you're traveling or if they are traveling, remind them to bring something that makes them feel comfortable. Bring something that reminds them of a safe place. Even if it's just something that they can hold in their hands that can remind them that, it's going to be okay. Just something that they are used to can be a huge help. And lastly, mental imagery is a really handy tool. If they are able to do that and feel comfortable and it doesn't lead them into a scary place, that can be a really helpful thing to help relax the body and the mind. All right, so now that we have some emotional safety planning tools, what are some other ways that we can help support a survivor? So when a survivor comes forward and shares their story and what happened to them, it can be really difficult to know what to say or how to react. So here are just some ideas for how to support a survivor in your life. First is listen to what they have to say. Do not pressure a survivor into sharing more details than they are willing to. Give them all the time that they need to discuss what happened to them. You can offer your support by asking the survivor how to help them best. This is a lot better than assuming that you know what's right for them. Give them back that autonomy. If a survivor is interested in a forensic exam, which in more layman's terms is a rape kit, and they are local to Frederick County, encourage them to call us at Hartley House. We have a medical accompaniment staff who provide advocates on site to provide support and crisis intervention in person during that exam as much as the survivor wants or needs them. You can also just encourage the survivor to contact Hartley House using our 24-hour hotline number, and our crisis workers can provide them with the support and information whenever they need. If you are not local to the Frederick area, we will have a slide at the end of this presentation as to the national network that can connect you with your local agency. And lastly, you should also allow the survivor to decide how involved they want you to be. Even if you feel like you want to be extremely involved in helping them and you want to be at the forefront of their healing, that might not be what they need or what they want. What matters most is that we listen to what they feel like is best for them in that moment. They can change their mind. They might need you, for a week, and then they might just be like, listen, I need some space. Best thing you can do is just respect what they need and the time that they're feeling it. Another useful idea is offering the survivor a place to stay. They might not feel comfortable being alone or at their house or wherever they live. Or you can stay with them if that's what they prefer, just something to offer. This can help them feel more safe and secure in their living arrangements, or just help them feel like, they don't have to go through it alone. Next tip is recognizing our own anger is really important. This is a common emotion among people who are secondary survivors. So, it's not the primary survivor's responsibility to address this for you. And that's a really important thing to remember. And it's also not something that should be shared with the primary survivor. They are already dealing with so many emotions. We need to be able to recognize and process our emotions as a secondary survivor, separate from them. Practicing self-care and connecting to a place like Hartley House can be really helpful. We at Hartley House actually do offer our services to secondary survivors. So if that is a situation that you are in, please do not hesitate to reach out. We are here for you as well. Next is reminding the survivor that it's not their fault. This is so crucial into supporting someone. Many survivors will blame themselves for what's happened, but they have to remember that it's not their fault, and it's important to tell them this and tell them this often. Next reminder is we have to be patient with the survivor. There is no strict timeline for healing, and everyone's path forward is different. Give them the time that they need and remind them to be patient with themselves as well. A helpful way to show support is by providing your physical presence and accompanying the survivor to different appointments if they are okay with this. If they have a doctor's appointment or a court appointment, it can be really emotionally taxing to deal with that and relive that experience. And, they might really benefit from having someone near them who they don't have to explain things to. Again, that is the survivor's choice, but again, just an idea to share. Engaging in self-care activities is also so important to every survivor for helping them cope with these intense emotions. Encouraging a survivor to partake in such activities and, reminding them of things that they used to love or made them feel safe and comfortable. Practicing mindfulness or grounding techniques can be really useful. If you need ideas for that, you can always call our hotline, or you can follow us on social media. We have a lot of ideas to share there that can get you jump started in how to start a self-care journey. Lastly, reminding the survivor that the assault or experience does not define who they are. Survivors are so much more than what has happened to them and what has been taken from them. Remind them that it is not their fault and that they are still who they were, and they can still be the person that they are meant to be. A great reminder for, a lot of that information is the TALK acronym. So T, thank them for telling you. Let them know that you appreciate them confiding in you and trusting you with their experience. A is for ask them how you can help. Remember, it is best to see what the survivor needs and what they want you to do rather than inferring what they want. L is for listening without judgment. It is very difficult for a survivor to disclose what has happened to them, and the last thing that they need is judgment from someone that they are confiding in. Do not judge them for their actions or decisions, but keep an open mind and remember that it is never the survivor's fault as to what happened to them. K is for keep supporting them. As long as it is within your capacity, continue to check up on them. Consider what they might need, especially after they confide with you that first time. Keep the line of communication open, and it's so important that they just know that someone cares and they're not alone. With that being said, it's important that we remember our role. So supporting another person going through trauma can be extremely difficult, especially when they're, your close friend or family member or just a loved one. Remember, we cannot fix their situation for them, but we can support them through it. What we might think is a solution might be unsafe for them. Make sure that the survivor voices their needs and what they are comfortable with and support them through that. Unless you are a licensed therapist, don't give medical advice. Try and connect them with one if they do not have one, or connect them through Hartley House or wherever the local resource center is for more support. Lastly, take time to recognize our own needs. Supporting a survivor can be incredibly difficult, and it's okay to take time for yourself. So with all of that, I'm going to turn it back over to Caroline as we can have a discussion around bystander intervention.
Great, thank you so much, Allie. So now that we've talked through safety planning and how to support survivors, we wanted to give everyone tools on how to possibly prevent sexual violence through bystander intervention strategies. And so before we dive into the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, it's important to remember that our priority is our own safety. And so before intervening in any situation, please always think through the possible positives and negative consequences of intervening and what you can do personally to keep yourself safe. Also remember that everyone's level of comfort is completely different. So do what's within your capacity and do what you believe is best. And so to get into the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, we have delegate, distract, direct, delay, and document. And delegate is you see something, but you don't think you're the best person to get involved to intervene. And that's completely okay. Maybe it's not safe for you to intervene, or maybe somebody else would just be better suited. That's totally fine. And a couple ways that you can do this is by getting a supervisor involved if it's in a workplace. You could get a friend involved who is the more outgoing one and is more, isn't afraid to, go up to a stranger and strike some conversation. Or it can be calling the police if you are comfortable and you believe that the potential survivor would be comfortable with that, or calling the Frederick Crisis Task Force. The next is distract, and this is exactly what it sounds like. It's going up to the potential survivor or potential perpetrator and distracting either one of them. So it could be spilling somebody's drink if you're at a bar. It could be pretending to know the survivor, the potential survivor, hoping that the potential perpetrator will lose interest and leave. But it can also be going up to the potential perpetrator and asking them a one-off question to allow the potential survivor to escape the situation. Next, we have direct, and this is directly intervening with the potential perpetrator. And a couple of notes here that if there is, alcohol or drug use involved, direct might not be the best option because we would never want any intervention to escalate into violence. So just keep that in mind. Another thing to look out for is that if you look like the possible perpetrator, you have this similar identities as the possible perpetrator, it might be in your best option to directly intervene with them because they are more likely to realize that what they are doing is wrong. However, on the flip side, if you look like the potential survivor, it might not be within your best interest to directly intervene because the alleged or potential perpetrator may then, revert that violence towards you, and we don't want that. So that may be a situation where delegate would be best. However, again, I do want to restate that if you look like the perpetrator, direct could be very useful here. So, using that to its fullest potential. Next, we have delay. And so this is maybe after an incident has happened, maybe it wasn't safe for you to intervene during the incident and nobody else was around to intervene. Then after something has occurred, you can go up to the survivor and ask them, are you okay? Do you need me to do anything for you? Excuse me, just acknowledge that you saw what happened, you noticed that it was wrong, and you're there for the survivor if they need it. Sorry, there's something in my throat. But anyway, it's important to remember delay, especially because it has been shown that checking in with the survivor after an incident can actually decrease trauma symptoms. And so again, using that delay feature when it's safe can be really important. And then lastly, we have document. And this is, again, exactly what it means. It could be taking out your phone and recording an incident if it's appropriate, or writing down a report if it's appropriate. And two things to remember here. One, we want to make sure that another individual is intervening if possible, or that document is the only safe option available. If that's the case, please be sure to say the date and the time and what has occurred before you start recording, or, if you're writing it down, to answer those questions as you're going along. And the second, and really, I think the most important when it comes to document, is do not share this information without the survivor's consent. So always let the survivor know, hey, I have this information. What do you want me to do with it? You may be doing something that you think is going to be great. Maybe you're sharing this video to social media, but that survivor may not want that to happen, right? And it may cause more problems in the long run for that survivor. So again, it's really important to check in with that person. And then if the survivor says, you know what, I really don't want that, please delete it. Follow what they're saying. Again, they are the expert in their situation. They know what's best for them. So delete it if they ask you to. And then that is it for the bystander corner. And that is really it for this program. We're going to leave you with some resources, but we really appreciate you staying here and watching this video. And we hope you learned some new information. And so here on this page, you can see we've got that hotline number, specifically Hartley House's hotline number. And you can also find our website at hartleyhouse.org. And then here is the National Sexual Assault Hotline. And again, that's if you're not local to the Frederick, Maryland area, you can call that number and they'll get you in contact with the agency that's close to you. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see online resources to just further your learning if you want to know more about sexual violence and what you can do. Or if you need more support, or a friend around you needs support when it comes to sexual violence. So this is the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assaults. There is MCASA's Specific Legal Institute, which is right below it. And then there's the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And then lastly, we're going to leave you with our contact information. Again, that hotline number, can't stress it enough. Please call if you ever need to. And again, secondary survivors can also call that number and receive our services, meaning if you know somebody and you support a survivor in your life, you're also eligible to call that number. There's our website, and then our email if you want to reach out to us, get us to do a training for your local organization, just let us know and shoot us an email. But thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.